Elizabeth Montgomery died at the age of 62, which is definitely not young. Yet no one can deny that were it not for her sickness, she would have had a lot more years of life ahead of her. Which leaves us to wonder, what if she'd lived beyond 1995? How would her life have turned out? What movies or roles would she have starred in? What about her relationships? Well, let's dive into this speculative journey and find out. Elizabeth Montgomery died of colon cancer in 1995 only because she ignored her symptoms until they were too late. But what if the cancer had been detected earlier? While filming Deadline for Murder, Elizabeth first noticed flu-like symptoms. However, she ignored them and committed to the shoot, which lasted till late March 1995. By then, the cancer had metastasized from her colon to her liver, and there was no more hope. But if she had attended to her symptoms immediately, the likelihood she would have survived the illness is very high. But come to think of it, what if she had been born a few generations earlier? Would her life have turned out the same? Now, if Elizabeth Montgomery had been born a few generations earlier, her career options as an older actress would have been very limited. At that age, it would have been in her best interest to consider retirement. But in the 90s, the industry had changed significantly, and older actresses had far more decent career options than their predecessors. Elizabeth, who was quite an iconic actress already, would be able to use her star power to pursue interesting roles. The great thing about established actresses in the 60s is that they no longer need to act for survival. In their younger years, sometimes they accept roles just so they have enough money to keep the lights on. But when an actress achieves stability, she can now consider roles that are artistically appealing to her. This was the trajectory Elizabeth was on right before cancer reared its ugly head. One of her very last roles before she died was as a voice actress in Batman, the animated series. The superhero cartoon was hailed as a groundbreaking piece of entertainment. Part of its appeal was its voice cast, of which Elizabeth formed a limited part. If she had lived past 1995, would she have pursued more animated roles? Well, the likelihood of this is very high. After all, animated technology improved at the turn of the millennium, meaning that more and more animated shows were made faster and faster. Public interest in animation also rose dramatically, giving studios a further incentive to make them. It's quite likely that Elizabeth would have voice acted in a lot of these shows, giving her career an incredible second wind. But this is not to say she would have left screen acting completely. So, if she didn't leave, what sort of roles would she have pursued there? Throughout her long Hollywood career, Elizabeth demonstrated that she was as adept with comedic acting as she was with dramatic acting. She flexed her comedic acting on shows like Bewitched, while showing off her dramatic prowess with The Legend of Lizzie Borden. All in all, there was nothing she was not capable of doing. And the older she got, the more diverse her portfolio became. Like Angela Lansbury or Helen Mirren, she would have done her best with whatever she could lay her hands on. But what exactly might these roles have included? Elizabeth was a noted women's rights activist. This manifested in her work through her roles in A Case for Rape and The Legend of Lizzie Borden. However, she was not just interested in clear-cut cases with perfect victims and despicable perpetrators. Instead, she was drawn to complicated women whose inner lives held unknowable complexities. If you know anything about Elizabeth's past, particularly the relationship she had with her dad, you will know she is one of these complicated women herself. Robert Montgomery's rejection and disapproval of his daughter led her into the arms of much older men way more than once. Elizabeth also turned to her work to process her traumas and get over them. This is why she likely would have acted a couple more times in the true crime genre. In her youth, Elizabeth mostly ignored the complexity of character that made her sex life such a mess. But as she grew up, she accepted reality as a way of understanding herself and processing her pain. This kind of openness would have allowed her to go further with her characters than she ever did before. And the fact that studios took a lot more risque with what they were willing to put on screens would have helped immensely. Despite being nominated for the Emmys and the Golden Globes several times, Elizabeth never walked away with a prize. This stage of her career would have been the best time for her to walk away, with the recognition she very much deserved. Screen acting aside, Elizabeth was also a noted stage actress. As a matter of fact, she won a World Theater Award for her 1956 Broadway debut in the production Late Love. Had she lived past 1995, it's likely that her love affair with stage acting would have been rekindled. After all, this was the medium where she had vast reserves of untapped potential. Elizabeth would likely have gravitated towards the same kind of roles on the stage as she was used to on the screen. Complicated women with dark histories and dangerous neuroses. She would have excelled at drama and melodrama, putting out legendary performances night after night. But she could also have been a musical star. Let's face it, Elizabeth's work on Bewitched revealed her to be a wonderful comedic force. She was also quite a talented singer and actress. Given the chance, she would have given a wonderful performance in a stage musical, one that might have even gotten her a shout at the Tony Awards. Sure, in her 60s, there would have been limitations to what she could do as a dancer. But when it came to singing, she had quite a powerful voice, and if she was surrounded by a wonderful supporting cast, then the sky was the limit. Too bad she didn't live long enough to see all this manifested. Performing aside, there's another way Elizabeth could have made a big interest in showbiz. As a producer, she would have had the power to craft shows and characters that mentally stimulated her. She also could have acted in these shows herself or made them for younger actresses. All in all, her long and storied experience in Hollywood placed her in a unique position to succeed as a producer. It's quite easy to extrapolate the twists and turns Elizabeth's career would have taken had she survived her battle with cancer. But what about her personal life? Well, Elizabeth's successful marriage to Robert Foxworth proved she finally overcame the complex she had over her dad and was finally willing to settle down. For a few years, the two of them lived happily with the 3 children she had had during her marriage to William Asher. There's no doubt that Elizabeth would have been a terrific mother and wife. But what about her other work? Something that's less known about Elizabeth is that she was quite a talented photographer, so much so that her work was exhibited in galleries and published in magazines. If she ever decided to slow down as an actress, photography was always a viable career alternative for her. There's no telling how big of a photographer she would have been once she was free to fully pursue that passion. Photography aside, Elizabeth was also quite a talented painter. As a vocation, this is much less physically demanding than photography. If Elizabeth had applied herself to this passion, how different would her legacy be today? It's just such an interesting prospect to consider. Now, the word activist is thrown around a lot these days, but Elizabeth Montgomery's activism was definitely not just for show. She always went the extra mile when advocating for others. When it came to speaking up for gay rights, women's rights, and animal rights, she was almost always front and center. Had Elizabeth lived to see Hollywood's Me Too reckoning, there's no denying that she would have spoken up as well, especially as an older actress who experienced the golden age of TV. She also would have lent her support to much younger actresses. Though she was a troubled woman, that didn't stop her from being kind. What if Elizabeth Montgomery never died in 1995? Well, she would be in her 90s today. At such an age, would she have retired from acting, or would she be finding a way to make it work regardless? There's no denying that so many years of wonderful life were denied to Elizabeth when she died in 1995. Had she lived to see those years, how different would the world be? One can only speculate, but from what she did in the past, it's safe to say it would have been interesting to behold. If you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll also enjoy the one showing on your screen right now. Click, enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you on the next one.